did 2 years ago, realizing that it was an area that a lot of people weren't completely familiar with, but we were sort of hitting them on our audits. And in fairness, we said, well, we can't keep doing that without probably taking the opportunity to better prepare people so that they understand what they need to do with the SOC report. So we understand that it's not they're not naturally intuitive, nor are they fun to read. And a lot of people legitimately might say, well, it sounds like it's important to you as an auditor, but I don't know why I need to do anything with it other than to make sure I tuck it in a folder and have it ready when you come in once a year. So hopefully we'll go through some of the stuff today so that you have a better idea of what you need to do with it. We're going to try and make it easy so that if you do these basic things, I think you can avoid an audit finding and also have good information to improve your operations too. So we'll run through our objectives for today. Gail, if you'll advance the slide. Gail?
Yes, I'm here.
Can you just advance? Yeah.
Next one, examples.
Yeah, the agenda, actually the agenda. It's not showing up on my screen. I don't know if it's moving for other people.
Does everyone see this?
I see the title screen.
All right, now I'm in.
So I don't know if everybody else can, but on my Teams, I have the ability to move the slides myself.
Huh.
So Gail, I think you're sharing your screen, correct?
Hang on a minute. We have the.
I can move the slides too.
That's interesting.
Dennis can't see the slides.
Oh, I can see the slides. Mine just aren't moving.
We've got our expert in here.
I can just move forward to PowerPoint though anyway if you want.
Are you on the?
I haven't.
Okay, I just want to see what we're seeing.
No problem. 1 second. SOX training. Oh man, you know, so fast training.
Is anyone seeing the slides change right now?
I'm not.
You're not.
That's Joy.
Just give us 1 second. I just need to see what someone's seeing.
Yeah. I can see you, Dennis.
And we can, everybody has the slides, so I guess you could just open them up and we can just move through them that way. That might be easier and tell you what slide we're on. I can do that.
Yeah.
Why don't we do that? So just moving to slide 2, which is the agenda. So we're going to go through and describe what is a service organization, what are the types of reports that are out there.
Which one is it?
Okay. Okay.
All right, I think I have it now, guys.
Yeah.
How's that?
Okay, you got it now, Dennis?
Yes, I'm good now. So on the agenda, I think the lottery folks are having trouble getting in, Gail, if you can add them in. So anyway, sorry for the bad start here, but so we'll go over what is a service organization, what are the types of reports that are available, and how to know if a SOC report is available or should be available. So SOC reports are not universal. Not every organization is going to have a SOC report for you. And then how do SOC reports fit into management's overall responsibility for the design, operation, and monitoring of controls. And that's really why we're doing this, because it is important for you guys to consider this within your overall responsibilities. And does every contractor vendor provide a SOC report? So the quick answer to that is no. So skipping over to slide 3, we're going to go through what are the most important areas to focus on when reviewing a SOC report. So we're going to try to make this easy for you and say, look at these things and show where you can find them. Then that's going to help you do this rather quickly, efficiently, and hopefully avoid any audit findings. So we'll run through all those bullets there so that we can tell you where it's likely that you can find these things in the SOC report. Number 6, what if I'm having difficulty evaluating whether my activity is included within the scope of the SOC report, or if a noted exception impacts my activity? So that's not an easy one. Some SOC reports cover a wide variety of operations within that entity, and you might only be using a very narrow piece of that entire operation and the service that they're providing for you. So that's something that you have to be careful about when you look at the overall report. There might be an issue that doesn't even relate to a service that they're providing for you. Number 7, what tools and resources are available to help with the review and consideration of SOC reports? So clearly this training, and everybody has these slides. Gail and I are going to be available to any of you for follow-up questions. And Gail is going to go through later on a tool that you've seen probably already before, which is a review tool that Control developed to simplify and document your review of the SOC reports. And that covers number 8 as well. So just quickly getting into the actual examples of service organizations in state of Rhode Island operations. So this is an area that continues to grow quite significantly from when we first started looking at SOC reports. So they're all over the place. They're becoming more common because there's more outsourcing of activities, including pieces of activities. So some of the examples that we have in state government, the Medicaid program through Gainwell, the whole MMIS, is a service organization claims processing system. EBT benefit processing, and that's on multiple programs. So for SNAP, TANF, unemployment insurance, TDI benefits, WIC benefits, the benefit delivery part, the last part of the benefit delivery cycle, is typically handled by a service organization. And basically they take care of the part where the electronic benefits end up on a card or through ACH or an electronic payment into your bank account. The Employees Retirement System of Rhode Island, where we spend a lot of time every year doing the audit, a lot of SOC report activity and service organizations. So the entire investment portfolio, which is about $10 billion right now, is all handled by Bank of New York Mellon. They're the investment custodian and record keeper for the portfolio. So that's the role that they play for us there is very important. Morneau Chappelle runs the benefit system for the retirement system. That's a cloud-based service organization. Ceridian does the payroll processing of pension benefits. And TICREF for the defined contribution administrator is also a service organization. So we have trustee services all over the place too. Treasury uses different service organizations to do their job for short-term investment management and bank reconciliation functionality. Cost allocation plans that are, almost every department has a cost allocation plan. If they're done by PCG, which is a common one, their AlloCap process is a service organization, and they have a SOC report. Employee and retiree health benefits and pharmacy management through Blue Cross and Caremark. IT disaster recovery and data center services. The lottery, and those folks are joining us today too. The whole sports betting through your iPhone. The whole gaming activities and the e-wallet settlement services are all service organizations. So those are it's not an exhaustive list of everything that's a service organization, but that gives you a good idea of the variety that's out there. And this continues to increase. One thing that I would emphasize too, that you probably heard the term software as a service, and that's basically cloud-based computer processing operations. Those are becoming increasingly common, and those are good examples of service organizations. And they're a good example of where you'd probably be very interested in getting some kind of a SOC report on what they're doing with your data, because in a software as a service, they're not only running the application, but they're also have all your data and it's all in the cloud. So that just gives you a flavor. So what are some of the risks of outsourcing processes to service organizations? So as I said, it's becoming increasingly common. While generally done for expertise, functionality, efficiency, and reduced cost, risk can increase due to loss of control over an entire process, and that's where the SOC report. You're delegating this process to someone else, but your responsibility for knowing what's going on once for that contracted activity doesn't end. So we talked about cloud-based software as a service situations, which are growing. We talked about the fact that the responsibility for those tasks, and that's where we're coming at it from an audit perspective. And those of you that have had an audit finding related to SOC reports, even though you've contracted and somebody else is handling this functionality for you, you can't completely separate yourself from what they're doing for you, and you have to look at it from the whole continuum of the piece that is still within your control and how this delegated piece relates to the whole process and how you monitor that as well. So those are some of the risks and the objectives of what we're talking about today. So on slide 6, just to sync everybody up, what is a service organization control report? So SOC reports, as we commonly refer to them, are prepared by a service organization's auditors to perform an examination of controls at the service provider. So the reports are quite detailed. They often go on for more than 100 pages. Some are even longer than that. So it includes management of the service organization, description of their controls and systems. So that's where management of the service organization, they have to document all their controls that are in place. And then the auditors come in and look at the design of those controls, and then also in certain situations, the type 2 report, which we'll talk about shortly, they do detailed testing of those controls. And then the auditors provide an opinion on whether the service provider's systems, the controls are adequate and suitably designed, and 2, whether the controls were in place and operating effectively during the period covered by the audit. So that's really the most important piece here, is the auditors are actually opining on the adequacy of the controls and the fact that they have done tests to ensure that they were operating effectively during the period covered by the audit. So if there are any exceptions that are noted during the audit, management typically provides a response that are included right within the report. And then 2 things that we're going to talk about today too in detail. It will typically describe user entity controls, and that user entity controls are when the service organization says they sort of put a fence around where their responsibility begins and ends. So a good example that I think everybody can relate to, let's use our Medicaid example. So the MMIS processes claims, but from the MMIS perspective, they have no responsibility for determining eligibility for the Medicaid program. So they are assuming that if they're told that a person is eligible for Medicaid, that they're going with that. They have no responsibility to ensure that the person was eligible. So they would define user entity controls in that example and say participant eligibility is a user entity control. They're not assuming any responsibility, nor is it within their control structure to do that. And then we'll talk about subservice organizations, and simply a subservice organization is when a service organization uses another service organization, and that's not uncommon. A common example of that is when one organization uses a separate data center for either their processing or for data backup. So that's a typically common one. And we'll talk about what you need to do if you see that type of thing where there is a subservice organization identified. So skipping over to slide 7, just quickly on SOC reports, you'll hear some of this language thrown out there: SOC 1, SOC 2, SOC 3, Type 1, Type 2. So to make this simple, we could probably spend more time on this, but I don't think it's going to help you that much. So SOC 1 reports are relevant to user entities' control over financial reporting. SOC 2 is more on the IT level, and It's really talking about integrity of data and confidentiality, and the data side of it more IT driven. And a SOC 3, which we don't see all that often, is really more of a publicly available report that would not have a restricted use on it. So we don't see those all that often. You will see the SOC 1 and SOC 2s fairly frequently. The type 1 report is when they have not done testing of the controls. They're really just looking at the design and the suitability of the design of those controls as of a specific date. The type 2 report, which is what we generally are looking for and is the preferred, is when they're actually, the auditors are not only looking at the design of the controls, but are also doing tests of the controls during the for the audit period to make sure that they were actually operational and working effectively during the year. So skipping over to slide 8. So you might ask, how would I know if a SOC report is available? So a common way is it might be included as a contractual requirement. So that's important. And I think that's something that you might want to consider if you're entering into certain types of service contracts. So it might be outlined in the contract. So a common one is that a vendor or contractor provides similar services to multiple customers and clients. So a good example was our EBT providers. They exist for that purpose, to provide EBT, electronic benefit delivery systems, to multiple clients. So that would be a common situation. They've built a platform, multiple customers use that platform, and then it's efficient for them to get a SOC report on that, their operation, so that they can provide it to their multiple customers. Cloud-based software as a service or shared data center situation, you will commonly find that they do have SOC reports, which are very important because they get into the whole data security. And it's very important for you to consider whether they've built appropriate controls into their situation, so that you know that your data is safe and secure. So a vendor website will often, sometimes if you get a good website, it will often provide some information as to the availability of a SOC report. And then basically, lastly, you can always reach out to your customer relationship manager at the vendor and inquire if a SOC report is available, and they'll refer you to the appropriate people. Sometimes it might be their internal audit department, or other people within the organization that can make those reports available to you. They generally are restricted use, so they're not reports that they want to provide necessarily to other than customers. And you'll see language in there that generally relates to restricted use provisions. So going over to slide 9, how do SOC reports fit into management's responsibility? I've mentioned that they're very important from our audit perspective because it gives us great audit evidence as to what's going on when the controls are performed by a service organization. So they're very important to us. And, I think what we're trying to do the training was, a lot of folks would say, well, they're important to you, but I don't really understand why I need to do anything with it other than to make sure I have it for you when you come in. So really, this is under the concept that management has the responsibility to ensure they have adequate internal controls in place. And that doesn't matter whether they're controls that you have within your own organization or operation, or whether they're controls that are performed by a service organization. So this is the way that you can effectively use this information to ensure that you have good controls in place and they're operating effectively over the entire continuum of a particular operation. So it doesn't stop at your door and then say, well, I've contracted somebody to do that, and I don't have any other responsibility to make sure that it's doing what I need them to do. So the SOC is really just a tool that you can use to ensure controls at the service organizations are working effectively. And the report are actually quite useful because I think, I know nobody's going to read them for enjoyment, but the description of management's controls are quite good, actually, that you'll find a lot of good information as to what they built into their operation. And those are really relevant to when you've contracted somebody to do something for you, that you understand what controls they've built in there to make sure that it's working the way it should. So it does provide good information for effective vendor management. On slide 10, so this is basically, as I was alluding to before, management does have a responsibility for ensuring the adequacy of internal controls and whether they're in place and operating effectively. So the SOC reports fit into that. They provide you the information that frankly would be nearly impossible for you to get otherwise. So I don't think anybody would be expecting you to be making direct inquiries of Bank of New York Mellon or calling Amazon Web Services and asking about their specific controls. So this is very efficient for them to put out a document that is independently provided and shows the testing, and it's also very effective and efficient for you because you would have no other way to get this high quality information any other way. Certainly, you know, whether it be you or whether when we're doing the audit, it's not effective for us to show up at the doorstep of Bank of New York Mellon and say, we're here to audit your operation. We're not only doing the audit of the employee's retirement system, but we're going to also try to take on Bank of New York Mellon too. So it becomes very effective way to get good information on what's happening on those contracted places. So on this slide is some of the verbiage that we talk about all the time about management having a responsibility for internal control and documenting its internal control. And this is really why we're putting the emphasis on management being aware of the SOC reports, reviewing them periodically, and responding to anything that's noted in the report. So skipping over to 11, we've had two findings, as most, even in the 2020 audit, about comprehensive documentation of the state's internal control structure, and this fits within that. And then also on information technology, on the continual monitoring of system security policies. The SOC reports that are available for certain types of situations are a useful and effective way to work that into the overall IT monitoring process as well. So why is it important that I read and review the information? So we've driven home the point that management is still accountable for service organization actions. The report is an easy way and effective way, as we outlined too. The report helps define the points at which controls begin with or revert to user entity management. So if you're looking at a whole process, and let's say we're talking about making cash benefits available to a participant in the TANF program. So obviously the whole process begins with someone applying for benefits and the eligibility determination process. The last piece of the process is the delivery of those benefits to their EBT card. And that's in that particular instance is where the service organization comes in. There's a transmission of a file with the data on it, and basically they make that those benefits available electronically on all the various cards. So within that, if you look at that whole continuum of a process, I think what you need to understand is where the controls are at different points in that process. So in the EBT piece, it's at the very end of the process, and the report can help you understand where, through their identification of user entity controls, where that begins and ends, what they're not taking any responsibility for. And typically in that instance, they're assuming that the data that's transmitted to them is valid and that those are intended benefits that, in this case, the state wants to have delivered and placed on all the various participants' EBT cards. So one of the most important things with looking at these reports, if you do nothing else, would be to scroll through very quickly and note if there are any exceptions. And there's two easy ways to do that, which we're going to talk about One is looking at the auditor's opinion. And we'll talk about, I think, I just got an email from the lottery. I think they're still having trouble getting into the presentation, Gail, if you could check that out. So two easy things would be, if you do nothing else, would be to look at the auditor's opinion on the controls. And if they give a qualified opinion, that means that they had an issue and it's important to understand what the issue is. And secondly, the other place that would you can is the detail testing that the auditors put right into the report. And typically they put it in a grid fashion. It's usually like 2 columns. They would describe 2 or 3 columns. They would describe what the control objective is, what their test results were, and whether there were exceptions. So it's fairly easy to scan those and see if there were any exceptions noted. If there were exceptions noted, that should flag you that those are something that you have to take a look at and decide whether that is relevant and something you should be concerned about. So SOC reports should be part of an overall vendor management evaluation program. And if you have deficiencies that are identified in a SOC report and the vendor is not willing or provides less than robust response in correcting those, I think that's something you should consider when you're renewing those contracts and or deciding whether they should continue for you. I think because of the nature of the SOC report, though, you're generally going to find that management is pretty responsive to the issues that are identified in there for exactly the reason that it's being provided to all their customers. So on slide 13, so you may ask, well, how do I know which vendors and will every vendor have a SOC report? And the quick answer is no. It really depends on the nature of the work performed. They're most common when services are provided by entities that provide comprehensive services to multiple clients using a common platform or application. So in the case of Bank of New York Mellon, they're providing trustee and investment accounting services to multiple clients. And basically they have work done on their operations that they provide to those multiple clients. The types of service organizations that State of Rhode Island uses are very typical of the entities that provide SOC reports. So I think we've got a good cross-section of the types of entities that typically provide those types of SOC reports. It can be negotiated as a contract requirement. That's happened in a couple of cases. It can also, like in the case of the state's Medicaid Management Information System, their SOC report is unique to the state of Rhode Island instance of the MMIS that they're operating, so it covers only the state of Rhode Island. But there's literally billions of dollars that are flowing through that system, so it's something that they're willing to do as part of their contract requirement. SOC reports are not cheap. To engage an auditor to do this type of work is typically an expensive proposition. So it's not something that every vendor would be willing to do unless they can spread that cost necessarily among multiple clients, or the nature of the operation is such that it's so significant that they'd be willing to do that. As we mentioned before, too, they're increasingly common in contracted IT situations. So on slide 14, so you're probably saying, I'm already stressed, I've already got too much to do, what do I do with the SOC report? And what we're trying to do today is give you the sort of the quick and easy, say, if I only do these things, will you leave me alone from the audit perspective? And I think if you do these things, we will probably consider you to be basically compliant with what you need to do with the SOC reports. So you need to just get familiar with the basic components of the report. They don't all look exactly alike, but they are very similar in the way they're laid out. So typically right up front, you're going to have the auditor's report. That's typically followed by the management's description of controls. That can be a long narrative that might go on for 60 or 100 pages, depending on complexity of their organization. Then there would be a detailed testing grid of the work performed by the auditors. So that would be the combination. They would take a look at the control objective, then they would describe their testing procedures and whether there were any exceptions on their testing. And then if there were exceptions, management's response would follow that. And then somewhere in there too would be a discussion of complementary user entity controls. And they would also identify subservice organizations. So one of the most important things that you can look at is what is the time period covered by the report. So the auditors in doing this kind of work, they have to do the work during a defined time period. They can't opine on controls like a year after the fact. They have to do the work within that time period. So the time period that's covered by the report is very important. It's not going to often align perfectly with, say, the state's fiscal year or things like that. So you might have two SOC reports that bridge a particular fiscal year, and in some cases we will get a bridge letter, which we'll talk about in a little bit too. So you want to consider also what type of SOC report. Is it the type 1 where they just looked at the adequacy of the design of the controls, or is it a type 2 where the auditors actually tested the controls? As mentioned before, it's most desirable to have a type 2 where the controls are actually tested as well. What's not an uncommon situation though, if it's an organization that's doing this for the first time, they might have a type 1 the first year and then move to a type 2 the second year. So for large complex service organizations, and this is important, I think you want to make sure you've got the right SOC report. And my services from this perspective is whatever they are providing to you as a department or as the state of Rhode Island, are they included within the scope of this report? So quick case in point, Bank of New York Mellon, I think, has maybe 3 or 4 different SOC reports that cover different divisions within the overall Bank of New York Mellon global organization. So you have to be careful sometimes and make sure that you've got the right SOC report that relates to the activities that they're providing for you. So if you're not sure, I think that might be something that you could have the conversation with your client service representative or whatever. But that's important. You could be looking at something that is totally irrelevant to the services they're actually providing for you. So skipping over to slide 15. So what should I do with the SOC report? So is the auditor's report qualified or unmodified? So if it's unmodified or unqualified, that's what people commonly refer to as a clean opinion. And basically they're opining and saying, everything looks good. We didn't find any exceptions that would cause us to give a qualified opinion. You could have an unqualified report, but there could still be some exceptions noted. So I think just be aware of that. So looking through the exceptions, usually in a grid form, I think it's easy to scan for them. So I know everybody's busy and you're trying to say, I don't have time to read this 140-page report from cover to cover. And I think if you scan that and you're looking for anything that looks like it is an exception, and we'll go through an example shortly so that you can see where this is flagged. If an exception is noted, consider whether that's relevant to the Rhode Island specific contracted services. So you might find something that it was an exception, but it's not even an area that's relevant to services that they're providing for us in the state of Rhode Island. Or you may consider and say, and this is part of what we're looking for, and say, okay, it's an exception, but I don't really see how it has a direct and material impact on their controls for what we've hired them to do. And that could be the case, but I think what we're looking for is that you've at least made that consideration. Would also be looking for whether if there are compensating controls at either the service organization or with your own operations to mitigate the impact of the reported exception. Is management's response and corrective action included in the report? So this is really critically important. If there is an exception noted, it's really important to see how the service organization responded to that. And as I mentioned, I think it's fairly typical to see that they took probably very prompt and appropriate corrective action. But if they don't, that is something that the expectation would be that you would follow up with the organization and say, I'm looking at the SOC report, there's a problem that's noted here, and it doesn't seem like the response that management's response really addresses the underlying problem, and that's perfectly appropriate for you to do. So slide 16, user entity controls, we keep talking about this. This is going to help you understand, as I said, where the fence is around what the service organization is doing for you, and then where your controls lead up to that or supplement the entire control process. So we did talk about EBT before. So determination of eligibility for benefits would be that would be a user entity control as we're using the EBT providers, because we're just transmitting a list of benefits to be delivered. The EBT processor has no knowledge or responsibility to know whether the folks are actually eligible for those benefits. They're just saying Mary Smith is going to get $540 posted to her EBT card, and that's all they're responsible for. So we'd be looking to see some consideration of the user entity controls that are identified, and we're going to go through an example of that too. And this really gets to the comprehensive understanding of where your controls interface with the service organization, and whether you've collectively, from beginning to end, have a control structure in place that meets your objectives. And subservice organizations, if they're identified, if yes, then you need to consider the applicability and whether a separate SOC report exists for the subservice organization. So one that comes to mind quickly is we've talked about the Medicaid Management Information System. So we do get a SOC report on the MMIS itself, but they identify a subservice organization, which is a data center that they use down in Florida, and there is a SOC report for that data center, and we also obtain that as well because it is relevant to the overall objectives. So that's the second bullet there. So moving over to slide 17. I think we covered this pretty much in the example that I gave. So the EBT benefits, the whole eligibility process would be a user entity control. Going over to slide 18. So I think a good thing to do, particularly when you have multiple SOC reports, is track the availability of the SOC reports. So typically they get on a cycle, and sometimes they might have the report done once a year, and you'd know what the interval was that the report was going to be available. Sometimes they do them in 6-month intervals, or even more frequently, like once a quarter. So I think you want to have an awareness of what that cycle of activity that they're on and when the report would be available. So if they did say an annual report that was as of December 31st, and you know that generally that would be available sometime in February, then it's something that you should be looking for and be expecting to receive, and have it on some kind of a tickler file so that you know that you're looking for it. As we mentioned, they don't often align perfectly with our state fiscal year. So you might have multiple reports. You might have 2 6-month reports that you have to piece together to say, I've got coverage from most of my fiscal year. And sometimes there'll be a report, there might be 3 months, say, they might have one done as of March 31st. And then we've got 3 months and say, well, I really don't have any coverage on there. So one thing is, if they were going to do another one at 6 months, you'd have one as of September 30. But you can often get a bridge letter. And what a bridge letter is at least it gives some assurance. The service organization provides a brief letter that just says there have not been substantive or significant changes in their controls subsequent to their last service SOC report. And that at least provides some assurance that, management of the service organization has represented that their control structure is pretty much static and hasn't undergone a major change. So we're looking for some documentation of your review of the SOC report. So Gail's going to go through that later. Accounts and Control has built a somewhat simple form that I think would be minimal documentation that you could include with each SOC report that we'd be looking for when we come in to do the audit. And it would cover the things that we've outlined today that are the major points that you should be looking for in the report. So Gail will get into that a little bit later. That review documentation should be made available to the Office of Accounts and Control. They're collecting these and sort of ensuring that all the folks in the various departments and agencies are doing that. And then when we come in to do the audit, we're going to be looking at what Office of Accounts and Control has accumulated, but we're also going to be looking at the individual departments and agencies. As most of you know, we've had those conversations with you even on the most recent audits that we've done. So there's nothing like a specific example. So we picked one from Caremark. Caremark is a division of CVS. And we picked this one for a couple of reasons. Most people have a passing familiarity with having a prescription filled at CVS. It's not an uncommon experience. And two, they also happen to have exceptions in their report that we make it easy to give you a good example of something that you should be alert to. So I scanned some examples here. So just as an example, when the report came in from Caremark, they lock it down so tight I wasn't even able to cut and paste things out of the report because it's protected. So I had to scan some of these things in. So that's why the quality isn't great. But this was from their cover. So as you can see, it's defining what the system is that the report covers. It describes it as a SOC 1 report compared to a SOC 2. So this one is over the basic operations for financial reporting. It defines the period. In this case, this covered a full year, but it began April 1, 2019 and ran through March 31st, 2020. So those are things that you should be able to find right on the cover, typically, of the report. Sometimes it won't identify it as a SOC 1. You might have to look at that yourself and make that determination. On the next slide, and I apologize, this is not easy to read because of the color that it was in, but this is the table of contents. So as we outlined, Section 1 is the independent auditor's report. We'll show some examples of that. In this case, the report runs on for 3 pages. Section 2 is management's assertion regarding their systems. Section 3, management's description of its Caremark benefit management system. So a lot of detailed information here. I think everybody got a link to the report. I don't expect you're going to read it, but if you scroll through it, you'll get an idea of how detailed it is. They describe all their significant controls, whether it be over operational matters or IT controls and things like that. And then Section 4, this is the testing that was done by the auditors. So this is the test grid. So they're outlining their specific tests, the controls that they tested and what their results were. And then management's response to testing deviations, that's in Appendix A. And then they provide some other information. So that just gives you a flavor, but in this report, this was, over 120 pages. Some of the reports go on even longer than that, so they're quite detailed. On slide 22, so I've cut and pasted some examples here so that you can see. So in this case, the report was done by Ernst & Young. You will tend to find that these SOC reports are done by larger accounting firms that sort of specialize in doing this type of work, because it requires a certain level of expertise and staff, particularly for large organizations. So the first paragraph is the scope paragraph. So it's defining what it is they were auditing. When that can become important when you're trying to discern whether the contracted service that Rhode Island has contracted for is within this. But I highlighted the second paragraph here and the description indicates that certain control objectives can be achieved only if complementary user entity controls assumed in the design of Caremark's controls are suitably designed and operating effectively, along with related controls at the service organization. So they're making a strong point here that it's really important that you consider these complementary user entity controls. And as I like to refer to it, this is where they're putting a fence around what they're responsible for and saying that it's really important that you look at the continuum of the controls, not only what they've got in place, but those that precede and maybe follow the piece that's done, in this case, by Caremark. So on slide 23, they did have a qualified opinion in this instance. So in that paragraph, it says Caremark states in its description that it has access controls in place to restrict and maintain logical security. However, as noted on page 101 in the description of controls to remove terminated employees and contractors' access in a timely manner were not operating effectively throughout the period, a defined period there of October to December 20. So quickly, I'll show you this on a couple of slides, but they had an automated process, and I'm oversimplifying here, but that basically was connected to their HR system. So if an employee was terminated, basically there was an automated functionality that their access to the system through a script that they ran terminated their system access as well. Well, they found out through the testing that there was a glitch in the way that system was operating. And in fact, the terminated employees' access was not terminated within the system during that time period. So this was a critical control objective that the auditors tested. They found that it was not operating as intended, and that was considered a significant enough deficiency that they modified their opinion. So this is the type of thing that you want to be looking for. If you see that wording, basis for qualified opinion, in the opinion report, that's a red flag that it's something that you need to look at more closely. And it will give you a link to what it is that was the basis for the qualified opinion. So after that, they do what we call an except for. They say, in our opinion, except for what we just described, they're providing an opinion on the controls in place during that time period covered by the SOC report. So this is, if you do nothing else, this would be one of the most important things you can do, is look at the opinion and determine if it's qualified or unqualified. And if it is qualified, you will see this wording in their basis for qualified opinion. And in the opinion paragraph, where it starts, in our opinion, if you see the words except for the matters described, that's a flag that there's something that was not considered great. So page 24, I just grabbed an example of management's description of controls, which is included in the report. So they provide all this detailed narrative of how they manage various aspects of the Caremark system. So it's very detailed. It is relevant. It's important to understand. Excuse me. Slide 25 is a good example of where they've defined complementary user entity control considerations. So they say right up front, Caremark's controls were designed with the assumption that certain controls would be implemented by user entities. So in that case, that would be the state of Rhode Island. It is not feasible for certain control objectives relating to the processing of transactions to be achieved completely by Caremark or the user entity acting alone. So this is basically giving the highlight and say, this is once again, the fence around what they're responsible for. So they give some examples here, which are the bullets of complementary user entity controls. And obviously these are going to be unique to each type of service organization. So the first one that they're talking about, which makes, I think you can identify with, is they have no responsibility for enrollment data. So in the case of the state of Rhode Island, when we provide to Caremark our list of covered employees that have health insurance, then basically Caremark runs with that and assumes that we've provided accurate and appropriate information as to who should be enrolled into their system. Second one, changes made to plan information processed by clients is authorized and completely and accurately entered. So it's putting some of the responsibility and making sure that whatever we've decided as part of the covered services under the plan, that we are taking responsibility for making sure that that's been accurately provided and loaded into the system as well. So you can read through. I won't bore everybody with all of those, but those are important. This is an important area to look at these for whatever SOC report you have and decide which are important and relevant, and whether it should prompt consideration and say, yes, I do have controls. I recognize that that's my responsibility, and I feel like we have appropriate controls in place that would supplement what the service organization is doing. So moving over to slide 26. This is an example of the test of controls. So this is still the Caremark report. So this is in the auditor's test grid, and it's the 3 columns as we described. So the control objective, this was where I provided an example. There's no exceptions noted in this case. So they describe the control activity, and that would relate basically to management's description of the controls. They describe what the test of controls, what they did. So in this case, the auditors are saying, for a sample of new FAFs, and I don't know what that means, but inspected the review documentation, determined with the sales team and legal department reviewed the FAF and agreed the pricing, programs, and services from the FAF and client contract, and any discrepancies were researched and resolved. In their test results summarized, they say no deviations noted. So in this case, based on the auditor's test, they said everything was good for that control that they tested. Now, conversely, on slide 27, control objective 12. So the control objective is controls provide reasonable assurance that logical access to data, programs, and computer resources is restricted to authorized and appropriate individuals. So as you see with the red arrow in the test results, it says deviations noted. So this is the example where they describe that their automated process to terminate employees. So if you read the 12.05 there, it says access to the network for terminated employees is removed through an automated script within 72 hours based on notification from HR or strategic procurement. So they had set up a nice control that was all automated, that as soon as somebody was terminated in the HR system, it went through and terminated their access. The problem was they found it was not working the way it should have. So that's where it created the deviations noted. And this would be a good example. If you see anything like that, they put it in bold here. I think it's easy to scan these grids and just be looking for that to see if there was a deviation noted. So now if we have a deviation noted, the next thing we're going to look for, basically on slide 28, is management's response. And this is where this is critically important. So they say right up front, management agrees that terminated employees' access was not removed in a timely manner. So they get into a whole narrative there about what they've done to fix it. And I think I won't read it to everybody, but I think I would describe it as a timely and appropriate response by Caremark management to the issue. And I think that would be a good example and say, I looked at their response. It looks like they reacted timely and appropriately to the issue that was identified. And I think we'd be looking to see that you made that determination that you thought their response was good and timely and appropriate. Now, if they gave sort of a lukewarm response and said, you know, which I think is going to be unlikely, but if they did, and you say, well, I'm not really happy with their response. I don't think it was on point. I don't think it was comprehensive enough. Then that's where you'd go back and contact maybe your client service representative for the company and say, I need to know more about what this was because I think it's relevant to the service that they're providing to the state of Rhode Island. I'm concerned about it. I didn't think that their response was comprehensive and maybe appropriate enough. And that's where you can, it's clearly within your purview and appropriate for you to have an additional conversation with them if need be. But I think like in this case, I think their response was good and appropriate and seems to address the issue quickly and appropriately. On slide 29, audit expectations. So ultimately, you know, I know most of you are probably participating today, not because of an innate curiosity about SOC reports, but more because we've probably written you up or provided a finding at some point about you not necessarily doing enough. So, I mean, from an audit expectation, what is it that we're expecting when we come in? And, you know, that's what part of this training is, to be fair. We don't think it's fair to just come in and write an audit finding without helping you to understand better how to use these reports and how to do it efficiently and effectively. So the first thing is that the agency has collected the reports and reviewed the reports using the accounts and control form, which Gail is going to go over. So that's the first thing. Make sure that you have the reports and make sure that you've reviewed them and documented your review using the accounts and control form. If there were any exceptions noted, some consideration of whether the exception had relevance to services provided to Rhode Island and whether the issue was satisfactorily addressed by the service organization. And if need be, that you did some follow-up or outreach if the resolution of the issue was incomplete or unsatisfactory as identified in the report. So going back to our Caremark example, so I think we can see that they reacted timely and appropriate. So that was access to the system. So I think that one's not totally clear and say, what does that mean to the state of Rhode Island? We're taking these pharmacy claims that have been processed for active state employees and retired state employees and using that information. The fact that they didn't terminate access to some of their employees who left the employee of Caremark, does that mean our data isn't relevant or reliable or whatever? Probably not, but I think that's where, you know, I think you'd want to document that you've at least considered what the exception is and whether that means that there was a problem. Now, you could have a situation, I can't necessarily think of one off the top of my head, but you could have an exception and say, well, you know, that causes me to have some concern about whether the data that I'm using was reliable. I think in this case, because it was more of a IT computer access control, it was probably not as a direct an impact on the data that we're bringing into the state. So, and the third thing would be awareness of the SOC report schedule and obtaining bridge letters to cover the state fiscal year. So I think once you get into a cycle with this and know when the SOC reports and what schedule they're going to be prepared on, then it's relatively easy to follow up on these and be expecting certain reports. And if you don't receive them on the normal schedule, that you reach out to the company and say, you know, I usually get a SOC report around this time. Is it delayed? Are you still expecting one? If you changed your cycle, which happens sometimes too. Flipping over to slide 30. subservice organizations. We talked about this quickly. So this is when service organizations use other service organizations, not uncommon. And sometimes you'll get a whole laundry list of other service organizations. And I think what we would be expecting you to do is take a look at those and decide whether you needed to get more information on those subservice organizations if relevant. So as we talked briefly, a common one is a data center. So for like the MMIS, they use a data center down in Florida. We certainly think that the operations of the data center are important and relevant to the overall operation of the Medicaid program. So we definitely believe that the state should get a copy of that SOC report for the subservice organization, and we're interested in that as well. So if you see those highlighted as subservice organizations, document that you've considered whether whether other SOC reports exist or whether you think they're relevant to your objectives as well. So I think that covers that, and I think that's where I'm going to break off, and Gail's going to pick up from here. So before we go to Gail's part, I'm certainly open to any questions if anybody wants to jump in with a question now. We've got some time for questions at the end as well.
Oh boy. I have a question. Can you hear me now?
It's got a lot of echo.
Yes. Is that better?
Yes.
Oh, awesome. I just have a couple of questions. Sure. For the data center at the SOC, do they need? Oh man. Can you hear me now? I'm sorry. We're having like echo issues here. Let me turn on my volume. I'm sorry. Can you hear me now? It's
Still echoing.
It's echoing. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Hang on a minute.
I think we'll try to resolve this here, and we can just go to Gail. I don't know if you're gonna stay on, Dennis. I just have like maybe 3 or 4 questions.
Oh, sure. You know, you could put type the question, and then we could do them from there too. All right, Gail, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay. Can everybody hear me okay? No.
Yes.
You can. Okay, good.
Yes.
Very strange. He's echoing and I'm not, and we're in the same room. What I'm going to do is dive a little deeper into what our user entity controls are and trying to give you a better understanding of why they're important, why they're relevant, and how they can be useful to what you are doing. It's going to help you evaluate what your controls are over some functionalities and be able to monitor it. So you'll be able to understand what you have in place to mitigate anything. And I'll also walk you through the checklist. So we're going to go over what are user controls, how do I evaluate them, how does it apply to my agency? And lastly, why is it important that you receive it, read it, and react to the information on a timely basis? First off, the user entity controls are controls that are the responsibility of the agency. Example, physical access. We've been using the person terminated. That is also our control. We need to be able to make sure we have something in place that will help mitigate that. With the banking organizations, we need to make sure that the large amounts that we send to them are in a format that they have requested, say they've requested it in an encrypted manner. We have to make sure we do that for them. With Caremark, the controls were designed with the assumption that certain controls would be implemented by us, our clients, the users, and pharmacies. Our users, we have to ensure that certain controls that relate to the transactions, they cannot do them. So we need to take responsibility for them. We're going to go through what user entities have been placed in operation for the achievement of the control objectives in this report. The user entity control considerations presented below should not be regarded as a comprehensive list. There's always more. So if we have controls that each user entity should establish, they're going to provide reasonable assurance that the client review implementation testing results before giving the authorization to load the data into the engine. We have to make sure it's correct. If there's any, and we need to identify and communicate any errors to Caremark. If there are any changes in the plan information that is processed by us, we need to make sure they're authorized, complete, and accurate. Any information, including the enrollment data supplied to Caremark, is authorized, accurate, and complete. Any output reports that are reviewed must be accurate and balanced. We need to identify any errors or discrepancies and let Caremark know timely. So controls that each user should be establishing to provide reasonable assurance that the clients review implementation testing results before giving authorization to load enrollment data into the adjudication engine. Clients identify and communicate any errors to Caremark in a timely manner. That's our control objective 1. And you'll see in a couple of slides where these are. Changes that are made to any plan information that is processed by clients is authorized and completely and accurately entered. Information including enrollment data that's supplied to Caremark from a client is authorized, accurate, and complete. And that the output reports are reviewed by the appropriate user personnel for completeness and accuracy, and output is balanced. That's our control objective 1, 3, and 5. I'm hoping this is going to, do you have a battery connected with you?
I do.
Mine's running low. Controls, I'm going to go real fast because I just got the notice that my battery is running low. We may be saved.
See,
Thank you. Thank you. All right, we're saved. Okay, so we need to evaluate what our user entity controls are. What steps do we take next? The client, we review the implementation test results before implementation is given to load enrollment data into the adjudication engine. Control 1. The reviewer must determine what process is in place to ensure that this information is communicated to Caremark in a timely manner. What do we have in place that will make sure that what we are doing is going to cover this objective? The controls made to plan the information processed by clients is authorized, completely, and accurately entered. For control objective 1, the reviewer must determine what process is in place to ensure proper authorization and accuracy. What steps do we take to ensure that the information, including enrollment-related data, that we supply to Caremark is authorized, accurate, and complete? We must determine what process is in place to ensure the information supplied is authorized, accurate, complete. What do we have to mitigate if there's an issue with their testing? And lastly, what output records are reviewed by appropriate user personnel for completeness? The reviewer has to determine what process is in place to ensure the output reports are complete and accurate, that any errors or discrepancies are communicated to Caremark in a timely manner. Why is it important to review these? It should be part of your management risk process. They need to be suitably designed and operate effectively to ensure the process performed by the vendor produce the expected results. You need to ask if my policies and procedures in place are effective for each process. What is in place to mitigate any errors should they happen if there's no specific policy or procedure? Without effective user entity controls, the SOC reports may not be reliable, and the opinions generated are based on controls being in place. I will send everybody a oops. I will send everybody their own template, but for now, we can look at what we have here. This is a checklist that, excuse me, everybody will be using. This is also located on the controller's website. And what I do is I sit and I will read through the SOC report first with this sitting next to me and look for the items that are on here. These are kind of a spot. This is really what you need to look at. Guide. So as Dennis said, we have a type 1 report or a type 2 report. You need to identify which it is. What is the type of opinion that has been provided? Is it qualified, unqualified, or did they just disclaim it? If we have a partial year, do we have a bridge letter? Do we need one? If we do need one, we will need to request it. And on this line, I would ask if you have requested it, just drop in the date that you requested it on. If there are any exceptions, you'll need to see that. Make sure that you take a look at them. If there are, is there anything that you need to mitigate those? Is there anything in place? Has the service organization management properly addressed to your satisfaction what is been done to correct these? For the user entity controls, were the user entity control consideration section part of what was reviewed? Did they have a section? You need to determine that too. Sometimes they don't break it apart and specifically say this is a user entity. You need to read a little bit more into the report to see what they have identified as those. Did you review them? And make sure that they really do cover what we are trying to mitigate. For the user entity controls that were determined to be applicable, did you evaluate them? And are they adequate? And if there were any control deficiencies noted in the previous steps, have they been properly mitigated? I would like to see a little bit more on this, and just give me a little blurb as to what is going on, what you have done to mitigate it. And finally, just a conclusion as to what your feelings are about this, and sign off and send it to me along with your report. And that is everything. So we are now open to questions. You can also direct any questions to Dennis, Margaret, or myself.
Yeah, so just to add to that, you may have questions. We're more than happy to help you. If you have an interpretation, you can say, I don't understand what this means, or whatever.
Just a minute.
Oh, hi, Dennis, can you hear me now?
I can, yes.
And do I have any feedback?
No, it's good.
Okay, I left the room just to make sure. So I just have a couple questions for the user entity. So for the EOC, since, you know, a lot of the systems or the infrastructure, the backbone of the network is there. So maybe a lot of the user entity controls may be there. Would this template or a SOC be required for that, for the data center itself?
So I'm just trying to understand your question. If you contracted with somebody to perform a certain service that is relevant to, say, the state operations center, the state's data center overall, is that sort of your question, Tony?
Yeah, like, you know, with Microsoft O365, right? So we contract with them for email, O365, OneDrive, all that stuff. They would likely, Microsoft being how big they are, they likely have a SOC for their
Right.
systems. Here's a question. Who would be responsible for actually reviewing the SOC? Let's say they review it, you know, they request it, and somebody's responsible. Would it be the agency AIM, some sort of technical, you know, the agency information manager, technical support manager, a specific role within the agency that's responsible for governance over this entity? I just want to nail that down.
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think when we get into IT type things, I think it could probably be any of those. I would probably leave it to do it, and I think it's important that there maybe be a coordinated effort to decide who would be the most appropriate person to review the report. And it would probably depend. So like in the case of Office 365, I would say that probably would be done once within Do It. And it wouldn't need to be done at individual agencies. In another situation, say like the MMIS that we just talked about, and if there was a data center related to the MMIS, I mean, that could be done, you know, within EOHHS, or it could be done at the Do It level. And I would leave it to you guys to decide what you think is the most appropriate place for that to be reviewed. I don't think there's an exact right or wrong answer as long as the information is flowing up and being considered by the right folks.
Okay, and I guess the last question would be, I just want to verify if I heard you correctly, that essentially the OAG, they are basically going to review the accounts control, the templates that have been completed, and not necessarily go to each agency and ask for the SOCs themselves to go through the SOCs. I just want to.
No, no, we'd still be, for any entity that we're auditing, whether it be a federal program or if it's relevant to, when we're doing a financial audit, we'd be digging deeper than what is at the accounts and control level. We'd be getting the reports and probably having more detailed conversations as well. I think the accounts and control process is really an added process just to make sure that they're being considered, and that accounts and control is also aware from their overall responsibility if there were issues, say, at a certain level. So it's really accomplishing a couple of objectives. But no, we would also not just be relying on the accounts and control. We'd be obtaining the reports in and having detailed conversations with folks at the agency level too.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else have questions?
Dennis, just a follow up to Anthony's last point.
Yes.
I mean, obviously from the audit side, we're also going to be interested in some of the more important user entity controls. So that's where we'll probably follow up with the individual agencies too, because just to the extent those aren't being, those controls aren't in place and operating effectively, on our end, it sort of minimizes the effectiveness of the SOC report if those controls aren't also in place. So that's where we'll have more back and forth with the agency.
Right. No, that's a good point. Thank you. So just does what we talked about make sense, or I guess just to get some feedback, is anybody sort of saying, well, I still have no idea what I'm supposed to do with this, or do you think this is important training that we should repeat like annually for folks, or do you think we should try to do it at a deeper level, take a deeper dive into the reports, or maybe, you don't have to say it now, but you could even shoot Gail or me an email. Just give us an idea of what you think would be helpful to say, yes, definitely do this annually because I think it's a good refresher and there's new people that are joining our organizations that don't know about it. Or if you think we are staying up too much at 30,000 feet, but you need a deeper dive into some of this, let us know that too.
Hi, Dennis, it's Ariana.
Hi there.
I think that it would be helpful to have both, kind of like the 30-foot view for people that might be reviewing the SOC reports once they're completed by the responsible individual within the agency. But then I think it's also helpful to have a more detailed training for the individuals that are completing the actual report themselves. Not all of us have an auditing background. So it would be helpful to kind of pick out and go through. I know some of the reports themselves are pretty large in size.
They are.
And I know you highlighted of what to go through, but just kind of some tips or just going through some samples, I think may be helpful of an actual report or two, for individuals that may actually be completing the reports, just from what we've experienced at Rido. And
Okay.
I think completing it on an annual basis, just because of the change in staff and new people coming on board, would be helpful as well. But thank you very much. I found this to be very helpful.
Oh, good. And thank you for your comments too. That's helpful feedback.
Of course.
So if there aren't any other questions, I think we came in pretty close to our hour and a half. That was pretty good. As I said before too, if you have specific questions, there's no reason that we can't, continue to have a more detailed conversation with your specific situation. So as I tried to allude to, I think from our perspective, I would say like the Bank of New York Mellon SOC report that covers the entire investment portfolio for employees' retirement system. That's probably the one that we place the most reliance because they're doing everything for the employees' retirement system, and it's probably one of the most detailed and comprehensive and long reports. So they're all over the spectrum here. I think some like the EBT providers are a little bit simpler because you understand it's a one function that they're performing, not multiple functions. So it's sort of hard to capture in the training that we're doing at this level all the nuances of it. But if you have specific questions and want to follow up and say, you know, could you help me look at this report, or could you help me explain page 4 here? We'd be more than happy to take a look at it and walk you through that.
Dennis, if there's one thing I could probably maybe stress for the agencies is most importantly is get the reports as soon as possible. And then maybe reach out. I mean, there's certainly a benefit to even our group to have those meetings and discussions with the agencies earlier, even if it was, you know, even if it's just walking through the SOC report with them. The earlier we have the information, it's better for our audit planning. And then it's a good chance for us to sort of maybe help and answer any questions that the agency has. And, you know, we can sort of give them our thoughts on what we consider sort of key controls, and then we can get their feedback on some of their user entity controls. So I see a benefit on both sides in doing that earlier in the process, as soon as those reports can be obtained.
Right. No, those are great points. Thank you. Anything else? Gail, what do you think? Are we all set?
I think we're all set. I thank you very much. It's been enlightening.
Good. I thank you for the coordination. So I appreciate everybody's attention. So I know that you've got a lot of competing things that you have to do. So thanks for making time for this, and hopefully it was somewhat helpful for you.
Thank you.
All right. Take care. Have a good day, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Good.
Press 3 dots. Yeah, thank you.